To the Point with Congressman Bill Pascrell, focusing on the concerns and issues facing the families of New Jersey's 8th Congressional District.
Hello, I'm Congressman Bill Pascrell Jr., and this is To the Point. This program is a monthly communication with the people who live in the 8th Congressional District and throughout much of northern New Jersey. Since America was attacked on September the 11th, 2001, our intelligence community has been questioned by the public, members of Congress, and the media. Additional skepticism arose when the Bush administration claimed to hold intelligence information that would lay the groundwork for America's invasion of Iraq. In light of the attacks that shook our nation, America's intelligence infrastructure has recently been overhauled. There has also been a notable changing of the guard. On May 30th, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, acquired the leadership of General Michael Hayden. Today we will take an inside look at the CIA, the new and the old. We will explore where the intelligence community has progressed, where it needs to be improved. And it is my honor to be joined by a recently retired 26-year top CIA operative, the former chief of the Europe Division, Tyler Drumheller. Mr. Drumheller was in charge of covert operations throughout all of Europe. The Europe Division is one of only 6 CIA international divisions, and Tyler was entrusted with coordinating counterterrorism operations against the gravest threats to international security. So I want you to pay close attention. This is the real thing. Having retired only months ago, Mr. Drumheller's career ranged from the close of the Cold War to the opening of the global struggle against terrorism. Mr. Drumheller holds a unique perspective that is invaluable in advancing America's intelligence apparatus. Tyler, welcome.
Thanks.
I know what your crazy schedule is. Now that you're a big star on television and everything, I'm glad you for taking time for coming to visit us.
Please.
How in God's name did you get involved with the CIA? You went to Virginia, took courses at Georgetown. You know 6 or 7 languages.
Right. Well, I graduated from University of Virginia. I was in graduate school at Georgetown, and then I was studying Chinese, and they actually approached me to come work for them in a sort of a special job they had at the time. And I thought about, did I want to be a college professor, or did I want to do that? And it appealed to me at the time. It was the height of the Cold War, the late 70s, and I really felt, my father had been a military officer, my grandfather was in the military.
So it's in the family.
Yeah, so I felt I should do my bit. And
right.
I actually only intended to stay 6 years and get my Chinese up to speed and then come back and 30 years later. 20,
Wow. What is counterterrorism? We've heard it used so many times, and how is it used by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which you belonged to for so many years?
The counterterrorism is the effort to stop before it starts terrorist attacks, to identify terrorist groups and to prevent them from, and find ways to prevent them from attacking our country, our citizens, and our assets overseas. And that can be everything. There is no set way of doing it. Each group is different, each person is different, and so it takes a lot of work to study the groups. You have to understand them academically, understand how they work, the countries they come out of, what drives them, and then you have to construct an operation, an intelligence operation, to either penetrate them or figure out a way to get inside of their workings, find out what they're doing, and then you have to work with the police and policymakers, the military in some cases, many cases nowadays, to either stop their attacks, arrest the leaders or the individuals that are going to cause problems, and take them out of the picture. And generally, when you do that, it disrupts, like these recent arrests in Canada. That will disrupt all of the terror networks in Canada for a long time, even if those guys weren't members of the networks, because as a terrorist group, it throws them out of whack. They don't know what the people have told.
What did Canada use? What did the Canadian intelligence use to trap these characters?
What it is the Mounties and probably CSIS had sources in these mosques in Canada amongst these groups, and they Some they developed themselves. I suspect some they got from us. I don't know, but I would assume because we do work very, very closely with
Well,
them.
you use the word spy, so that's good.
Yes.
It's like an entree into my next question. Spy, espionage. We usually don't use those terms. Why? Why are we so frightened in America when we know if we're going to prevent things from happening, we've got to have boots in the field, and people like yourself with all the experience guiding those boots?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think one that's perplexed a lot of agency officers over the years. I've thought about it, but and in contrast, you see the British service. In England, they're much more, maybe they're used to it or much more attuned to it in their society. They don't. In America, it sort of goes against the openness in our society.
Right.
And there is a lingering feeling that these are people that are doing things that are out of control. If people only knew the amount of controls and oversight that were over the intelligence community, I think there'd be less concern about it. But I think the only real explanation I've ever been able to come up with is we have a very open, sort of trusting society, and therefore it makes it things that are secret, that have to be kept secret, and are always suspect. People are less likely here, and it's good. They're less likely to do, when you say something's really bad, you better just believe me.
How do we protect what's in the Constitution? I carry this with me all the time, Tyler. Not to impress you, but it's a tremendous document. How do we draw the line when we're snooping and protecting people's rights? How do we accomplish that?
Well, that is one of the greatest sort of challenges of the intelligence community. It has been since the CIA stood up in the late 40s. It's always, when I was coming up through the ranks, they were very, very careful. We had to be very, very careful about how you dealt with Americans. Like you couldn't deal with an American as you would with a foreigner. In other words, if I were to meet you and say, I need some help figuring out something. If you're in a foreign country, I need you to help me do something. I couldn't say I was from the Fuller Brush Company or something. I had to tell you I was CIA right up front, and that's a long-standing rule. Same thing with if you were going to use wiretaps or audio operations against an American for counterespionage, or you had to go to the FISA court, which was set up in the late 70s.
It's a big debate now.
And it's a big debate now, and it's one that I'm not sure. There is real value. There can be real value in these type of operations.
Right.
They can be dangerous when done in the absence of human intelligence as well.
But we're talking about warrantless eavesdropping, and I have a problem personally with that, since you can get the warrants even after you do it. You have a certain amount of time to do it. What's the problem? I mean, you're worried about exposing yourself if you go get a warrant when most of the time they're granted.
No, I mean, this is something I have a problem with. I disagree with this idea of doing it without the FISA court, because, frankly, having done lots and lots of these counter-espionage cases and catching spies, and also in foreign intelligence cases of foreign spies here in the States and overseas, it takes. I've never seen one turned down, and I think I've heard on the news that there've never been any turned down. It never takes longer than, they're very quick in turning it around. It also doesn't expose anything, because the judges who sit on this court are kept secret, and I think they have to go through all the same background checks and polygraphs and things that we do. And we use this in working against the Soviets, who were much more pervasive counterintelligence than any terrorist group is.
What I'm concerned about, Tyler, is this. This is an administration that we have in Washington for the first time that have changed the rules of the game. That is, this administration from the get-go said that and the president said this at West Point in June of 2002. He said it's all right that if we have preemptive strikes, if we, in order to protect ourselves. No president in the history of this country has bought into that philosophy. If that's the philosophy, then that changes the rules and the dimension of the playing field, it would seem to me.
And it also, it can be, it's a dangerous road to go down in one sense, because you very seldom have, intelligence is a gray world. You very seldom have reporting that says planes are going to fly into the World Trade Center at 8 o'clock in the morning. I won't say almost never, because I have been in cases where you have things like that, but it's rare. And generally what you get is the reporting that says something bad's going to happen on this date or something's going to happen here. And, you know, people say a lot of things that they don't really understand when they talk about this, as if you have more case officers, you're going to get more specific intelligence. The intelligence business never changes. It's been the same way since the dawn of time. And there are three parts to it. It's the collection, the analysis, and the policy. And the policy part is every bit as important as the other two parts. It has to be used properly too. And so if you are looking for an absolute answer that says Iran will have a nuclear weapon on such and such a date, you're setting the intelligence community up to fail, because it's very unlikely that you're going to get that exact date, because they're working just as hard on the other side to fuzz it up. And then
I think it would be critical that the intelligence agencies were strictly committed to being objective in their analysis.
Well, they have to be. Yeah.
Why don't you speak to that issue?
Well, I think they have to be. If they're not, then you're lost. If it makes everything you do meaningless, because if the intelligence community, if the intelligence analysts feel that they're, and I've never seen this administration or the Clinton administration or any of them, and I've worked under, I think, 5 or 6 administrations, no one has ever said, come in and write this bad intel report. But they're bureaucracies, and people get ahead, then they figure out, by making the boss and the president happy. Right. It's almost incumbent upon the senior leaders, the president and the cabinet officials, to say, don't tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what you have. And you have to say that. I mean, I used to have to say that as a division chief to people.
Right, to your people.
Yeah, to people that work for me.
Right.
Because it's the nature of bureaucracy. And in this business, where there is room for saying, well, this guy said, I'm traveling to Damascus to see my wife, and they said, well, that could mean there's going to be a terrorist attack in Denver. So then you have to be very careful with that, and you have to say, this is what we think, this is what we believe. We don't know. Here's the other side of the story.
What I'm leading up to, and I get to in a few moments, is the intelligence prior to us going into Iraq, and I want to talk about that. Before I ask you about that, I want to ask you about General Hayden,
yes, who's
now become the head of the CIA, under Mr. Negroponte, who was the head of all the intelligence, or the overseer, or the umbrella. Is Hayden a good choice at this time?
I think Hayden's okay, frankly. I think he's a good man. I know Hayden.
How do you compare that with the guy Goss?
Well, I'm probably not the most objective person. I think Goss.
I'm not either, but go ahead.
I think Porter was when I knew him as a congressman, I got along with him fine. The problem with the agency is that he brought with him staffers who were settling a lot of personal scores and pushed out some of the really good people. Not me. I left.
I notice Hayden's going to bring some of those people back, perhaps.
Well, he's bringing one back, Steve Kappas. He's a very good guy, very close friend of mine. He was the DDO. He was the director of operations.
Right.
And General Hayden, when I was chief of station in Austria, which was my last job overseas, I needed a lot of help from NSA. He was extremely helpful, and he didn't have to be. He was a very decent guy. I don't worry so much about him being a military officer. A lot of old agency people do, but he's a pretty independent guy.
Can the CIA do its work without having warrantless wiretaps?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the one thing they always say, and that's where I disagree with General Hayden on, and I'd be interested to talk to him about where this all came from, but they always show this big stack of documents and say, look at this brief we have to file every time we do this. Well, what they don't tell you is that's boilerplate. All you do is fill in the names of the people and check the boxes. They don't fill out 10,000 pages every time they go to the FISA court.
I'm concerned about these warrantless wiretaps and snooping is there was a period of time, Tyler, between 1953 and 1973 that 28 million communications were handed over to the CIA by the Postal Service in New York City. I mean, if people don't have confidence in their government to protect their privacy, it would seem to me, that we're not only going over the edge, but the government's going to lose its own credibility.
And that's what you have in these cases. It becomes the sort of the law of unintended consequences. You start this out, and it sounds good, and after 9/11, this all sounded great. All the fetters are off. Actually, you sort of have to make at that point, you sort of have to make the decision that you're going to discipline yourself even more, because the tendency is to just go nuts. And so you have to say, does it really matter if you can listen, you can carry on operation for 72 hours before going to the FISA court, and you can usually tell in that time what you're going to have to do. And then if you need an extension, you can ask for an extension. But I think people need to know that that there is some governor on this, someone other than an intelligence official, other than me or General Hayden or anybody else, who is making a decision on it. Whereas it's a judge who's totally impartial. Because it's the type of thing that sounds good now, but in a couple of years, 5 years, it'll rebound on us, and it'll end up with restrictions that are even more draconian than the FISA laws, which are not that draconian, are more serious, and in the end, it always ends up hurting us.
That's what I think.
That's my concern.
All right, I have an article in front of me after you appeared on 60 Minutes, and there's quite a reaction to it. I mean, I've gone back over the last 10 years, not that many retiring CIA people went on 60 Minutes, but this is a very unusual period in our history. And in the article, it said, in an interview, Mr. Drumheller said that White House officials, and I saw the show, had repeatedly ignored the intelligence community's assessments about the state of Iraq's chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons program. 3 days after information, according to Mr. Drumheller's account, the White House told CIA officials that it was proceeding with plans to go to war. And we said, this is quoting you, well, what about the intelligence? Yeah. And they said, well, this isn't about intelligence anymore. This is about regime change.
Yeah, and
Tell us about that.
That was actually, the last quote was actually from an agency officer who was coming back from the White House, quoting them to us. And he, what we had was, as said on 60 Minutes, we had a very high-level Iraqi source that's been named, but I still can't name him, and I don't want to say it.
Right.
But he was a good source, and he had, and what he was telling us, it came from another service. It wasn't completely vetted, but validated. But it gave pause for thought. What he said was, they have a chemical weapons program, but in that they meant they had poison gas that was in the hands of political leaders around the country, around Iraq. And that was for use if they were attacked. He specifically said they could use it against Israel and they could use it against American forces. That's been known since before the first Gulf War. The crux of the administration's arguments at the time, and what they say that the agency failed on collecting on, was the development of nuclear and particularly biological weapons, because they had believed reporting that had come in from a source that the German intelligence service had called Kerbal, who was telling them that they had biological trailers and all that, and about 5 or 6 other Iraqi engineers who were validating, corroborating what he was saying. And in fact, as it turned out, and we had figured out, or we strongly believed, I shouldn't say we figured it out, but we strongly believed, because of the evidence that we found, that Kerbal was lying, that he was a fabricator. At the same time, we got a hold of this source, who was a very senior official in the Iraqi government, who told us the opposite information on the biological weapons and the nuclear weapons.
Well, why wouldn't the administration listen to it? Because you know what ticks me off? So I'm going to be very honest with you. So you're being frank, I can be frank too. The CIA was blamed for a lot of this stuff. When we found out that all of these things, the relationship between bin Laden and Saddam was a hoax. There was no relationship. One was a religious nutcase, and the other was a butcher. The point of the matter is there was no real essential relationship. There was no biological or chemical weapons. Secondary. And Iraq did not pose a threat on us. We've contained communism without going to war for the most. We couldn't contain little Iraq. What am I missing here?
Well, and that's the reason I went on 60 Minutes, because it was not easy to do. I know some people think, oh, well, he did it just to go on TV and stuff. But in fact, that's why I went on, because I felt like the officers that had worked on this were being blamed, when in fact it was a policy decision to go to war, far before that. The fact is that all of this, the terrorist things, the attack, what the Iraqis had, didn't present a threat to the existence of the United States. It presents a threat to our strategic interests.
Yet that's how it was put to us.
Right.
Condoleezza Rice said, let's fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. We don't want a mushroom cloud over here. I mean, there were all kinds of pictures put into our head at that particular time.
Right, and the fact is, at the end, they have said there is a danger, and we have to fight against and protect it, but we have to do it. It's not even, doing it in this sort of big, heavy-handed way is not even efficient, as you can see what happened. Right. And the point I was trying to make, too, is that they had time then to build a Gulf War I type coalition. They were pressing. The policy was already going ahead. This is clear long before all this happened in the spring of 2002.
Right.
And what they were looking for was information to hang to hang the policy on. And so they chose what they wanted to use and didn't use what they didn't want to use. Right. And now I was just in a session yesterday, I was telling you, with some other people here on the Hill who were saying, well, they had gas. They had poison. You said they had poison gas, so that's a chemical program. So therefore, they had CBW. So therefore, the war is justified. And I said, well, that's about the longest stretch of logic I've come across in a long time. But we'll just have to agree to disagree because you're wrong.
Why did the president and Mr. Cheney and Mr. Rumsfeld place in the minds of the American people that bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were joined at the hip?
I think, and I give them the benefit of the doubt on this in the one sense, I think that Cheney and the vice president and some of the other people that advised him, Undersecretary Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, people like that, people that are in the...
Who are gone.
Almost all of them are gone. The people that are in the project for the New Middle East that was formed in the late 90s, they really saw Iraq as the key strategic country in the area, and that if they could push Saddam out and build whatever they thought a democracy should look like, that would spread all over the Middle East, and therefore they felt like they had to do this. I think they thought the American people aren't going to go to war because they wanted to have democracy in Iraq, and so I think all of this, they were open to the idea that as part of the long-term strategic threat, and certainly Saddam was a long-term strategic threat. Right. He was a disorganizing disruptive factor in the Middle East. But the point is, we wanted to be able to do it so that you wouldn't have what happened. You wouldn't have enough
CIA
soldiers.
knew that there were no terrorists in Iraq before we went into Iraq.
There were little terrorist groups scattered all over the world. There are terrorists everywhere. Yeah. But Saddam, as you said, is an Arab nationalist, a socialist, and Bin Laden was an anathema to him, and vice versa. Yeah.
I'd like to get your response to something that's in The Sorrows of Empire. Chalmers Johnson, who speaks of militarism, secrecy, and he believes that we've attempted to get into empire building in the United States long before Bush was the president. And I want to know what you think about this, if you will. Immediately following the terrorist attacks of September 11th, once it had been established that al-Qaeda was the probable terrorist organization responsible, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, ordered Undersecretary of Defense Douglas Faith to set up a special intelligence unit within the Pentagon. Its specific purpose was to find links between al-Qaeda and the regime of President Saddam Hussein of Iraq, even though the CIA did not believe such links existed. It soon developed that the chief obstacle to these efforts in trying to do this was the Central Intelligence Agency. Its operatives and analysts could find no connection between Iraq and the attacks of September 11th. The administration didn't want to hear that.
And I think there's a lot to what Chalmers Johnson said. Certainly Feith set up that unit, and they wanted, and what happened also was there was a lot of high emotion after 9/11, and as the war approached, and there was a general feeling building that if you give us information that we don't want to hear, that doesn't agree with what we think, you're disloyal, or you're trying to disrupt us, or you're a nest of secret liberals at the CIA, which is pretty funny if you know the people that work at the CIA. But that's certainly, I think, what a lot of people in the administration felt. That was certainly the feeling, and you can see it in some of the things that are written and said in that period. You know, they need to be more aggressive, they need to be more human. Well, we had reporting; it just wasn't what they wanted to hear. And
we have all of these intelligence agencies. How many intelligence agencies?
Oh, there's like 16.
16. Narrowed down to 16, and all their sub-agencies out there.
Service.
Now, we are expecting Negroponte to oversee all of this information that's coming into us to protect our neighborhoods and our grandchildren, okay? Does it work?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is also, I have to tell you, this is my opinion, because one thing, there are people that think, since I'm speaking for the agency, believe me, I'm not speaking for the agency now. But I believe, and I think you've talked to some other colleagues of mine that feel the same way, that intelligence service that is smaller is better. You need a more efficient, shorter lines of communications, and more direct responsibility by senior managers. The chief of the intelligence service can't be a coordinator, or it has to be someone who has to lead, and has to have, so that the officers way down at the end of the line, who are out in the field, having to make judgments and take chances, know that someone's standing behind them, know that there is someone else beyond their sight that's going to back them. That was always the thing. When I joined the agency, it was always, they used to always pride themselves on the fact that there were never more than 2 people between you and the DCI, the chief of station, the division chief, and the DCI.
Right. Tyler, as you know, I came back from a trip with Homeland Security to London, Madrid, and Rome. Pleasantly, we were visiting all the places that had bombings. But I was very impressed with what I saw in London, and I'll tell you why. Boots on the ground. There is information that comes up from the bottom to the top, rather than from the top to the bottom kind of. The person who's out there, the Scotland Yard is out there in the streets. There's cameras all over the place in London. I don't know if we would accept that in our country or not, but I was very impressed with their ability to stay on top of things, and yet they still got bombed too in their buses and their subway.
Right.
I want to thank you for watching this edition of To The Point. I thank our guest, Tyler Drumheller. You were a hell of a guest. I want you to know that. I want to also thank you for your service to your country. I want to emphasize that, Tyler. I hope that Mr. Drumheller's inside perspective on the inner workings of the CIA has informed you on one very critical component of our national security. We have had a unique and candid discussion with a perspective that is not often heard in the media today. You have heard our thoughts. Now I would like to hear what you think about today's show. If you have any comments, any concerns, any questions, I want you to stay tuned. Our address, our phone number, our website address will appear in a moment. I want to hear from you about what you thought about this particular program and what we're doing on To The Point. I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I hope we're going to see you the next time on To The Point.